Yeah, I would like to thank everybody for calling into this, the 13th session of the IBIU BIM course. If you've been on all 13 of them or all 12 previous, thank you very much. So here we're going to be focusing on the future of BIM. So a reminder that this course is AIA accredited, and this session will count for 1 hour of structured learning within the AIA learning units, and the production is copywritten for IBI Group. We're going to focus on some of the newer technologies that are becoming available and touch on a couple of things. And I listed some items here. Really, it's kind of like a crystal ball, which is a little difficult to portray at times. BIM is ever changing. What we present today here as what's potentially coming could be existing, goodness, in even a month from now. But we're going to look at some of the new technologies, the stuff under development, and hopefully empower to imagine some of the solutions as we look forward to how to make differences when we're trying to deliver our work and deliver it in a better way for IBI. With all these sessions, I'll just start with a BIM recap, kind of lays the framework for where we are and what we're doing. So, reminder of the BIM definition. BIM is both a noun and a verb, and this is a huge item to stress when we talk BIM. If you're out there in a civil practice, BIM is not just about buildings or architects, it's about the generation and management of digital representations of physical and functional characteristics of places. So basically, look around you, anything you see in a conference room, on the road, on the sidewalk, in the transit corridor, all of the assets that are there have to be designed, constructed, and managed. BIM, the noun, are the files, which are the 3D models that house and contain the information that we use from a design perspective and analyze how to further during construction and into operations. BIM can be scaled, and it can apply to any type of project, whether it's in our buildings sector, our infrastructure, or whether it's part of our systems. Collaboration and planning is critical. If you don't know what you're BIMing and why you're BIMing it and how you're going to BIM it, you're most likely going to fail. Graphically, BIM is something plus information. And I choose those images specifically because it could be your traditional component of a building or any type of blob that represents an asset that's to be placed in the physical or spatial environment. The amount of data can vary from something quite robust to something quite simple, to just say what it is. From a building perspective, this is a typical one of our projects. It's this conglomeration of all of our models as they come together. But from a life cycle perspective, we have to deconstruct and remember that BIM is nothing more than a collection of models, which in turn is a collection of components. And those components are what live throughout the life cycle of a project. We talked about that during the asset management session. BIM is also spatially aware. So this example, you have a guardrail that's on a bridge, that's part of a road, that's part of a complex network. No matter what you see around you, even if you're in a conference room and you see a chair assigned to a table within a room, within a floor, in a building, in a street, etc. There's always that shift from the macro to the micro and vice versa, spatially connecting all of our assets to where they reside within the globe and digitally connecting them to all sorts of information pertinent to that specific asset. Lifecycle data is the concept of that connecting factor. You have a BIM model, you have other sources of information, schematic specs, operations manuals, operational screens, and who knows what else. And all of that data does not want to be repeated and therefore has to be connected from one source to the other source. I like calling it data gluing sometimes. We're building various streams of information, pulling them together, and gluing or fusing them relative to specific assets. We talked about what we could do with BIM, and this is this isn't all-encompassing, but when we say typically we do BIM, it's typically the orange. We have a model and we create our drawings and our schedules. We use it as a base for simple visualization, or we hand it over for advanced visualization, and we do review. The typical uses, the gray ones, your clash detecting, cost estimating, 4D schedule simulation, analysis, and specification linking may or may not be done on any one BIM project, depending on value, how it's scoped, how it's budgeted, how it fits into the overall aspects of the project. And then the green ones, specifically operations and asset management, that's the growing technology. So the future, if you will. More and more BIM projects will be riddled with asset management requirements as they're pushed down from our clients, or as we're linking into existing infrastructure or connected infrastructure. Very quickly on software, most vendors divide software into building, plant, and civil, and the reason for that is there's specific data exchange formats or analytical capabilities that are unique to the software, to the modeling software within those streams. BIM is not Revit, Revit is not BIM, but from a building perspective, Revit is a very powerful BIM authoring tool, along with the others listed, not to be confused with your civil authoring tools or your plant authoring tools. We take the software, we wrap it around our platform, which is our CAD applications, AutoCAD or MicroStation, how we share and collaborate, how we review our computers. We analyze where the information is going, where else it may go, and how do we get it there. Are we sending models to clients, data to clients? Are we syncing to other databases? Are we syncing into intelligent infrastructure? We talked about collaboration, and this is from a BIM/CAD collaboration perspective, not from an IT or office or people connectivity perspective. The 4 questions, we often get bogged down on question number 1 and question number 2. Very, very important. In our work in progress environment, what are we sharing and why are we sharing it? Who are we sharing it with? If we can't answer those questions, we're just going to fail at sharing. We talked about BIM execution planning. We've got our templates. We have stated BIM goals and what uses will be used to achieve the goals. The critical message there was BIM execution planning is supposed to enhance quality in the typical project management triangle. It's got to work with scope, schedule, and budget. You can't cause quality to explode or implode, or the triangle will fail. And then we talked about what does it mean when we're planning how to execute. And it's not just making the BIM execution plan, but it's stepping back and saying, what are our owner's requirements? What are our own capabilities? And those were very rigidly defined in the UK, not so defined in the rest of the world. So we've built a toolkit to say, ask the questions to the owner, ask the questions about ourselves and our supply chain, then make your BIM execution plan about what the project's goals are and whether we can actually achieve them. The last session we did some case studies, and it was to really show what have we done from the BIM perspective. So we had examples from building, civil, and plant. I showed some really small-scale BIM examples that I did in my past, and the focus was multidiscipline, how that data goes. You know, we had some examples for life cycle data as well from our intelligence sector. So there are some great examples, a multitude of them actually, so they're a good reference for any future proposal or referencing. So looking forward, you know, when I talk about the future of BIM, I get really, really excited about the possibilities of what we can do with data management and data synergy. But a lot of it will start with how do we standardize? And a lot of the countries are starting to form BIM organizations to help achieve standardization, or more so best practices. So of course in Canada we've got 2 of them, not just 1. So there's a story behind that. But the Institute for BIM in Canada, their focus has been the development of toolkits and contractual content that can be applied at the project level. So what they did is they built a BIM appendix that can be attached to any form of contract, whether you're using a CCDC, RAIC, an OAA document, or whatever format. The contract appendix would help to define who owns which portion of the model, so the model authors, to what extent the models are going to be developed, and at what state they're going to be when they're intended to be harnessed at various points throughout the life cycle of the project. It's very similar to the AIA document in the United States. They also developed these toolkits, either for data handover, construction, or design development, and I helped writing a portion of the practice manual. And the practice manual is it's generic and it's very best practice driven. Some of the graphs and diagrams from that manual we had in our Project BIM Lead session, and it talks about how to set up a project, how to set goals, the fact that you need a BIM lead, and that you need corporate project and user buy-in, and gets into strategies around that. Very good manual to be looked at. The Canada BIM Council focuses on user-level committees, networking of our practitioners, both in all facets of the AEC industry, as well as providing a certification mechanism within Canada. We do have a small collection of certified professionals across the country here, and they're focusing to grow a certification program both for companies, so we're trying to get IBI group certified, as well as an academic program. So this entire IBIU BIM series is under review by the Canada BIM Council as we speak. And their committees are open to all members, whether Canadian or from elsewhere across the globe, to feedback and interact. And they actually added an international committee to help to expose Canada to things happening elsewhere in the globe. In the United States, the AGC, Associated General Contractors, similar concepts. They help to drive the BIM Forum, the LOD definitions in the BIM Forum, a whole bunch of sub-forums similar to the Canada BIM committees where you can actually network and discuss items pertinent to the BIM community, as well as a certification program for the United States. So within IBI, we promote heavily getting our professionals certified at various levels within these programs. In the UK, far more ahead than the rest of the globe with the UK BIM Task Group. Started just almost a decade ago, and their focus has been the implementation of BS 1192, so the British standard that mandated BIM for all public projects as of January, and how to go about that. Developing resources, developing the employment information instruction, the EIRs, developing what it means to deliver data drops at various stages of designs, and connecting users to the resources that are out there. So if you haven't gone to the BIM Task Group website, it is so heavily informative, it's incredible. The last organization I wanted to touch on is BuildSmart. They are very heavy relative to interoperability. And it's very important that they're sponsored. You can see Autodesk, Bentley, Graphisoft, Nemcheck, Esri. Doesn't matter what the vendor is, there's this buy-in to the use of this IFC concept, so industry foundation classes, to exchange geometry and data across platforms to be harnessed as part of a standardization progress, building compliance, and garnering the users together. So they have an overall international committee with local chapters scattered across the globe. And a lot of countries that have developed BIM standards are actually using the compliance mechanisms built within the BuildSmart Alliance to analyze whether or not models turned over for delivery are in compliance with the ISO standards developed for the IFC file. So a very strong organization. If you're not a member of a local BuildSmart chapter, I'd highly recommend it. Again, like the focus is on the delivery of models, the delivery of data, and the interoperability of information for full life cycle use. There's a reason I'm going through all of these. In the UK, this diagram, this is built within their BS 1192. And what's special about this diagram is it defines where they're hoping to get to. So that red line, that's where they are today. They've achieved BIM level 2, which mandated collaborative work sharing amongst the supply chains. That would be designers and contractors and all of their subs, sharing of information in a collaborative manner, and delivery and utilization of BIM or models as the basis for the development of the content. They've got standards built around them and how to exchange data, the mandate to have project BIM leaders, or as they define them as interface managers and data managers, etc. They're looking at this level 3 and what that means to have full lifecycle asset management, so full utilization of the BIM data beyond design and construction, infused into the full asset management supply chain so that the information grows and lives and then can be carried forward for something beyond the design and construction. Similarly, in Canada, next slide, there we go. There is a similar diagram that the Institute for BIM in Canada has developed. And those 3 diamonds, that's kind of what's been worked on right now. They're looking at development of guidelines, so the practice manuals and toolkits, development of a curriculum, and that's being done in the education realm in conjunction with Canada BIM Council, but they want this BIM standard. And there is a push to try to achieve this in the 2017 timeframe to see if there could be some kind of national guidance standard that can be deployed and implemented to help lay the framework for advanced use of BIM. You can see the levels are very similar to those used in the UK. We're really trying to achieve somewhere at that level 2 range right now nationally. In the United States, I didn't have a slide for it, but U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is an example where it's an organization that has fully implemented the use of BIM, goodness, I want to say a decade, if not more. So depending on which facet of work, which facet of government or area that the work is being done, there are some mandated BIM requirements as well. It all leads to standardization of BIM. And when I talk about this, I don't want discussion or thought to go to it's commoditizing the design practice or turning architecture or engineering into a commodity, because it's not that, but the foundation to build this standardization, it's really about allowing us to excel and propel in what we're wanting to do and not get bogged down on how do I share my Revit model? How does my architect talk to my structural engineer? How does the civil engineer share with the architect? All of that should just be common practice. How do we share things globally? This timeline here, just to show you the implementation of standards. Some of these choppy images were from the BIM World Summit. And noticeable when I was there was that there is no national mandates for the North American countries. So that's the question. That's what a lot of the industry is looking at here on this side of the world is, when can we achieve this? 2015 was huge. We're 14 and 15. France, Germany, Spain, joining Sweden, England, Denmark. There's a lot of countries on there where a lot of work is being done, and it's under the mandate of a standardized delivery and standardized approach. I was first exposed to the Singapore standard, the BCA standard, probably about 13, 14 years ago. So they were far ahead of the game from a national mandate. There is economies of scale, though, as well, Singapore being much smaller than the likes of the UK, but it is a global trend to see our countries pulling things together. A lot of that are on the basis of these ISO standards. So having an international standard for data turnover, geometry turnover, and literally lifecycle data synergy is becoming quite important. So ISO 16739, the most important standard in my opinion from a BIM perspective, because it mandates the backbone, if you will, of how the BIM data structure needs to be, regardless of where it's authored. And that's the critical thing. It doesn't matter where the information is coming from. The important thing is that the information can be carried forward. And then, terms and processes as well. The the IDM, the delivery model, international delivery model standard, is an important one as well, to try to break down the barriers of, do we turn it over in Navisworks or Solibri or Revit or Bentley and iModel? None of that should ever matter. looking forward. This diagram, I'm not going to dwell on this one, but it was a BuildSmart initiative where they're looking to harmonize various streams of data. And the way they described it as, there's a needs, and whether it's through one of their chapters, one of their local chapters, what they called as a room, so you're designing rooms and spaces, or what they called as a third party, so a source of graphical and informational data for any sort of form of asset. It's all got to come together, be filtered, be developed upon, incorporated into projects, consensus on what should be, and then it can feed out, meet the project need, and help to build a final standard that can get down into industry adoption and training of your users. So, conceptually, I thought it was an interesting slide to show, and it's a little convoluted, so don't dwell on it, but it's that idea that we've got to start from the users, feed and pull the information, use it while simultaneously developing it, and then feed it back to our community. Another standard I wanted to just touch on here from the plant side is ISO 15926. Now, within IBI, we're at the cusp of starting some potential plant work, and this is very critical because this is why in the software slide we have building, civil, and plant. All plant software is molded around ISO 15926. To put it in simple terms, a valve is a valve, a pump is a pump, and a pipe is a pipe. And they all got to talk to each other, they've got to connect, and then we want to be able to exchange that information amongst various software. The beauty of this, and I like that diagram on the right there, everything comes from a data model and a core set of classes. And a classes means a pump, a valve, a pipe, etc. The IFC standard is very similar as well. A wall, a door, a room, a window, they are what they are. And as long as the software recognizes and acknowledges the fact that these core classes exist in the authoring tools, we can then propel that information forward to something else. So as we sit here, algorithmic or computational design is starting to leap. So this is your dynamo within Revit, generative components within EcoSim, the Rhino, Grasshopper, a little different but very similar. And I've got these standardized component classes, elements that are now controlled via algorithms, via programming. And that changes the way, from a user perspective, how models can now be developed. But you can't fret about, well, what's a wall, what's a door, what's a window, that's all got to be set in stone. And if you're using just Revit, it's pretty clear. As we grow and we start infusing potentially other softwares, or maybe I have a building that's being influenced by a linear corridor. So a transit corridor influencing my building, governed by an algorithmic design. Maybe transit is in Civil 3D, building is in Revit, algorithm is there. How do they all come together? It'll all be dependent on these component classes. And these are the things you can do. So instead of I say static, but instead of a parametric component that's static, if you will, in your BIM model, it's now dynamic. So the parametric component can be controlled, but it's now it can be controlled by its parameters, but it's now dynamically controlled by constraints and other influences of components around them. The first one was Revit Dynamo. This is EcoSim generative components. I always want to show the both so you can see that we may be interacting with others that are doing something using different tools, but the concept is there. So as we look to the future, more and more projects will start to utilize these types of concepts. I built this one just for fun, and it was just to do some data exchange, just to see how you can start to build something in Dynamo. And it's, I don't want to say, quote, easy, but for the users that are going to delve into this realm, it's understandable. How you define a parameter versus a component, and what you want to control, and what's controlling it. And then away you go. And it's pretty fun, to be honest. It's quite dangerous too, don't get me wrong. You can do some very scary things by saying, run my algorithm, and oh my God, what did I just do to my model? So we want to be very controlled. Within IBI, we actually have a task force looking at how to take algorithmic or computational design, build some best practices, guidance, workflows, and governance so that we can then have something ready for our future work. Now, when we talk about our future work, think about rethinking business. I think I showed this slide in the asset management. A lot of our effort is here in the design realm, working to do what we've always done. And you know, when you look at that, and we say roughly it's 20–21% of the actual life of that asset. The little blue piece at the bottom, that's design. And imagine, that's such a small speck. Now, we're not a contracting firm, so when we look at BIM and, you know, we're trying to make BIM work throughout the life cycle of construction, it's like, yeah, we want our BIM model, they want it to Classiotech 40 simulate, they want good cost estimating out of it, the contractor. We're there in design thinking, well, that's, you know, it could be more scope, are we getting paid for it? Is it in alignment with what we have to deliver as designers? And that's a good dialogue, and it'll never end between the designer and the contractor, especially in the design build or the P3 realm. But what about the life of that asset? So that remaining 80% or so of the lifespan and the information. So that's what we want to think about. And there's a lot of effort being done right now to see, well, what can be done in that realm relative to BIM and design technology to really make it work. This was a slide that Scott Stewart developed, our CEO, and it was, I want to use it because it's intriguing to lay the framework. This is what we do again, right? So we interact with our clients, we plan and design, we look over, if you will, construct and commission. So we're doing services during construction. We may do some as-built record modeling. That's about it. But there's these users that are continually interacting with the product, with whatever we design. So again, it's that beginning slide where I said the BIM is this conglomeration of models, but really it's a collection of assets. So you look around you. As users, you are interacting with everything that was designed on your behalf by whoever the client was in your build. I'm assuming most people on this call are in some kind of a building. But this idea of focusing on the asset and having this interaction between what we design and potentially operate now, something that's being financed, and have that as an overall service. So you may hear the term asset management as a service that we're kicking around right now internally with IBI to bring to fruition this concept of what can we do relative to harnessing our technology, tapping into asset management, and building something downstream. This idea of the sharing economy from the BIM perspective, you know, well, before I get there. So the seeker is this user, makes a recommendation to an owner who makes an offer to build a platform, then the seeker can request from the platform what they want. The example of this, and when Scott built this diagram, thinking of something like Uber, right? Nobody owns, the owner of Uber doesn't own the cars, but he built the platform from which us as users can access the asset in the infrastructure. And then there's the exchange of money, etc. So it's a pretty cool concept when you think about it. And imagine, as we're talking through this, how BIM fits in. So this idea of a global sharing economy. This is kind of what IBI does today. I think this was an image from one of our annual reports. So we have expertise. And in that expertise, we do land, facilities, transportation, systems. That's very generic. Those encompass, so facilities encompass all of our multitudes of buildings, education, living, healthcare, industrial, etc. But for simplicity, then we apply them through some manner, through the healthcare environment, water and energy, mobility, comms, education, etc., transit design. And then we hopefully achieve a result of smart something, and that's all of our work with smart cities. We're infusing what we do into the Smart City Initiative. But what if we spun that around and we started with those users inside these various facets, governance, living, mobility, etc., and we thought about, well, what can they do to infuse how we approach education, healthcare, etc. Those are kind of the Living Plus brands, or the education, healthcare plus, etc. Looking at Learning Plus, looking at how those users can mold the industries, and then how the molded industries then affect what we do. And if we do the outside in first, we can then augment and feedback outward. And that's something to think about, because if you think of BIM as a collection of assets that are to be used and harnessed by a user, then how are we designing those assets? We need to be understanding the user's perspective. What do they want to see? How do they want to see it? How would they interact? What would they do with the assets? So a very simple example, I'm just looking in the room I'm sitting in. I see the chairs at the table. What would my users do to these? Would we be moving chairs from room to room? Are they situated right? Is the table right? Do I need to be more have the room to be a little more mobile? How would the design of the space be influenced by how the user, whether it's a millennial, a Gen X, or a baby boomer, would actually interact with these spaces? And can we have something that meets the needs of the various generations as well? So I keep saying BIM is your collection of assets. This is a slide, when I built this a decade ago on the Olympics, London Olympics, never thought I'd still be coming back to it, but it is so true. That model, so that BIM, which is the collection of assets, which is a collection of little mini models, if you will, of what you see in the built form around you, starts in design, grows during construction, grows during operation, and you have something at the very end of the life of the model of that asset. Now, I always say, it's not that the model will swell with all the information, but it will be glued to. So it's that concept of data gluing to the various streams of information that would be achieved and pulled from various sources scattered across the life cycle and various types of digital representations of information. So just imagine my design, what I spec, it's in a model, the drawings I generate, the shop drawings from the contractor, what's actually built, the O&M manual, any particulars when it was changed, any as-built markups and the record drawings pertinent to that asset, how it's operated, how components have changed, was the asset replaced, when's it expected to die, am I leasing it, was it purchased outright, can I sell it, and then what do I do when it's come to its end of life? That's a lot of data I just threw on the table there. So what happens to that asset? Everything I just said there, right? So we built this chart here, if you will. It's a lot of stuff here, but the idea is the asset's going to go through some financial model throughout the course of its lifespan. There's going to be a project that defines what has to be built. We design, we build. And when we're designing, it's all about feasibility. We'll build some models, we'll think about it, we'll build our drawings, it'll get funded, it'll get scheduled, then it gets actually built in place. Whole bunch of things happen to that asset during the build and fit out, right? It becomes real, it has information, serial numbers, permits, whatever coordination, maintenance, etc., gets operated, and then it gets replaced. So from a BIM perspective, so what does that mean? We talk a lot about assets, but what's the tie between assets and BIM? So we kind of color-coded this. So what do I have and where are they and how are they connected? That's a huge question that the BIM tool will help to address. So if I want to move a pump in facility A, can I do that? Click the BIM model, see all the stuff around it from my operational screens. I can figure out, you know what? Can't just move that pump. There's ramifications. I may have to demolish parts of the building to get the pump out of there to get a new pump in, etc. Condition of my assets. How do I operate them? Held in manuals. That's a huge one. Manuals. They may be digital, but where are they? How are they tied? Then how much does everything cost? So we kind of mapped that and said, yeah, there's going to be a whole host of things happening to the assets, but those 4 items are scattered across that asset life cycle. So part of the opportunity is when we're designing, then constructing, and then it's operated, all of that data gets obtained at various stages throughout the asset life cycle. It's got to be glued together or else it'll be lost. So to glue it together, information management is so critical. Where is the asset, both virtually in the environment, using some type of barcode technology? Doesn't have to be RFID, it could be QR codes, simple printed barcodes, but everything is tagged with something, so I know where it is in the physical world. I go scan it with a mobile device, and I can then be exposed to all that data. And that data will grow. It may be connected to other databases that are being managed for operational purposes, whatever, but it will expand. It will contract when assets are removed. It's dynamic, but it has to be connected. If it's disconnected, there is a life cycle failure that's going to occur. So why is this all important? So there's concepts around cognitive BIM, looking down the road. It's not just enough that we do BIM, but what can we do to the BIM? So can cognitive and behavioral data not only inform, but also trigger an adaptation to the assets? And if the assets adapt, how does the BIM model respond accordingly to maintain the record of the asset? So just think about that. Think about walking into a space, and the space knows it's you, and triggers a change based on social information collected under your username. And sounds crazy, but it's not. It's actually happening. An example, University of Brescia is the one I keep using. They actually fit out one of their student cafeterias to do that. So they would walk in carrying their mobile device. The mobile device is the trigger that says they've entered the room, and they've played with their lighting, mechanical system, and some furniture layout to actually adapt and change. Very rudimentary right now, but the concept of that, it sounds very sci-fi, if you will, but it's there. It will be there. Data becomes a communication mechanism connecting assets to the users. Huge. So if I'm interacting and changing and saying something's working, something's not, I think the room should be warmer, I always sit in grid X of room Y, and I want that space to be this temperature, can it do it? Maybe not today, but definitely possible. The other concept is this idea of a digital economy. So that you're seeing in the world of Uber today. I don't know about you, I barely carry cash around anymore. Everything's digital from that perspective. Right? Imagine every single asset that you see in a building, in a linear infrastructure, in a civil fit out, is connected digitally to something else. And that's these concepts of the smart city. Everything is connected, everything's accessed, information is at everybody's disposal. So the user, the social side, is feeding the asset is adapting, changing, understanding, and when we look to change, either redesign, retrofit, or further design some other asset, we have that social interaction to draw upon to understand the benefit of the asset, how well it's worked, how poorly it's worked, and things that have occurred to it. So this digital economy concept, everything will be tied together. And I know it's not there yet, but just look at smart home monitoring just with your house and what you can start to buy. I was at Home Depot yesterday. I think I could have bought could have purchased an intelligent light switch, $50, $60, and it would have connected to an app on my phone. But we want to take what we do, both in this physical infrastructure, plan, design, construct, commission, tie it to the end user demand, and have that all connected via this digital economy. And that brings that infusion, if you will, that push-pull between what we're trying to achieve, the understanding of the users, what we deliver in the various healthcare, education, markets, etc., and how we function within our systems, urban, facilities, transportation markets. So that push-pull, the mechanism or the medium, if you will, is there today to facilitate that. BIM is on the cusp of being infused into that medium. So imagine, if you will, my simple generic BIM model there, now tied to what's happening. So we take those the user will feed back the environment, economy, the governing factors, how they want to live, how they want to interact, and how they exchange. And then from that, we will infuse the various components. Now, I did this in a rudimentary concept here, but imagine from smart people how the stations run relative to what I'm going to board my LRT. What has to be in there relative to what I need? Where should the monitors be? How should the layout of the furniture be? I'm now infusing that data at the onset of BIM, throughout BIM, at the completion of BIM. I did a study project once with the University of Toronto, probably about 8 years ago, and we were trying to tie a BIM model to, I think we were using Facebook as the mechanism at the time, just to do simply that, to garner the social response. So we said, here's a fictitious condo, how would you want it to be fit out? We put the model into a social data stream, and we tried to test responses, how to garner the responses, how to analyze that information, because you could imagine two people will say two competing things, so what do you do with that data? That's the hard part here, is that the data that will come to and from the end users to those assets, to either those operating the assets or us trying to design the assets, the data will be phenomenal, and it'll be in a quantity that could be unrecognizable. And what we want to do is pull that together and do something with that information. That's the promise of BIM. And at the BIM World Summit, they talked about the promise. Decades ago, you have this model that'll live through the life cycle. Nobody actually knew what that meant 10 years ago. And even now, what it actually means, it's something that's up for, it's up for debate on how it'll actually be achieved. But imagine, scenarios based on cost and activities, data that's being handed over throughout the life cycle at various instances to support asset management, complete refurbishment, so that's retrofits, renovations, rebuilds, tied to BIM that's intellectually enhanced and accurate as it can be connected into the digital world. It's phenomenal. Assets that are user aware. And that's something where, now that gets into anybody who's watched Star Trek and stuff, you see, yep, 23rd century, but no, we can see that in our lifetime and even in the short term to have the built assets respond to the specific users based on analyzed and accumulated data. It's a phenomenal concept. Just imagine it, because, we're there. Well, we'll be there, sorry, we're not quite there. Why cognitive buildings? So if you think of buildings or assets that could potentially trade with energy providers to understand how your buildings are behaving, right? So from a financial perspective, owners can have direct connectivity between the utility companies that service their buildings and the components in the buildings that consume the services provided by the utilities, seek optimization, seek adjustments, etc. And you are seeing that on some of your home appliances as we speak today. Building assets cooperating in overall neighborhoods. So that's in mostly your linear utilities, the feeding network of data as well as utility into these buildings, connecting to the assets and infusing back out, and then the awareness for comfort, energy performance relative to the users themselves. Understand and learn. That's what our assets will be able to do. They would then infuse, this is just a slide I took from the World Summit again, but that concept of infusing into a smart city. IBI does a lot of work from a smart city perspective. BIM has an impressive role or impressive potential to play with respect to how the data in BIM models, again, will gel and fuse with data from various other sources. And in the smart city concept, everything is connected. The Internet of Things is out there. And once our buildings become, digitally aware and connected, the BIM model will be tied into that digital awareness, and it'll all feed in this overall smart city concept. And we're looking, the cell is safe, smart, attractive, resilient cities, connecting the various streams of information, optimizing what we do and why we do it relative to the overall infrastructure that's put in place and how we, the users, benefit from that. That just cries BIM potential down the road. So think about that, the Internet of Things. In the BIM world, we say it's kind of like your Internet of Connected Objects. Every object you model could be connected to something else. So just imagine that, think about that as we look down the road, because it does have a huge impact potentially on how we lay our framework, how we set things up. What do we model, why do we model it, how we model it, and how delineated certain components are from other components. From a cognitive perspective, I've seen them today just in cars alone, and I keep referencing, I think it's the Lincoln Navigator, the idea there. So you can sit in the car and the car can adjust. It can recognize who you are, blow hot air to your side, cold air to the other side, adjust your seats, turn on the warmer for you, etc. So we can do all of that from a user sitting in the car perspective. But the item I liked here is the rear latch of this car example. And I keep saying it was Lincoln, I'm pretty sure it was Lincoln. The latch can open, and it'll actually analyze the user who's opening. So first it'll have the sensor, you approach it, it opens. It then scans to understand how high to open. So it's got to be high enough so you don't bump your head. It can't be too high so you can't reach to close it, etc. So it's a small micro example of a component that adapts to a user. And the automotive industry is quite far ahead from this perspective. I'll keep prefacing it. Just imagine the spaces you enter and how they could potentially adapt based on any number of users and readjust and configure accordingly. So that concept, it's phenomenal. I'll keep saying that. It can happen, and I don't think it's a pipe dream. I definitely think it's a near look where the occupant or user's behavior triggers an exchange. And it could be as simple as, I'm not happy with the makeup of the space, the temperature of the room, the rain. I'm in a transit stop and I don't like the cover protection from rain. Maybe on half the days in the year when it was raining, the rain was blowing horizontal, therefore the shelter doesn't shelter me. And it gives that type of feedback to lead to a potential adaptation. So, to try to pull all of this together, we spend a lot of time in the BIM world in the realm of BIM authoring. And rightfully so. In the world where we are today, and I would say looking forward probably even for another couple decades or so, BIM authoring, it's not settled. And in simple terms, we don't all do Revit the same way within IBI, let alone the same way across North America, let alone across UK, Middle East, India, or across the globe. Plain and simple, right? So we're going to have to work on that. But, we can't be stuck in the world of BIM authoring. So this concentric diagram here, if we do what we can do. We still want to standardize, be consistent, be common across our network. We want to be able to share our information, grow our models, meet the needs of our design contracts. But then the concepts of generic BIM, so pulling out from Revit, from Civil 3D, EcoSim, Graphisoft, Inroads, you name it, Plant 3D, OpenRoads, OpenPlant, to get from these components into a generic model that represents geometry plus the pertinent data. I can then infuse into the world of asset management. The next and final IBIU session will show as a potential service what we can do in that asset management realm, that fusion of BIM to the asset record. So we now have tied data generated from the authoring tool, but we've tied that information sourced from various points along the life cycle of the project. If we can do that, we can start to analyze the data. So data analytics is a whole realm into and itself. We can do so much with that, but we need clear, consistent, and I don't want to say standard data because it's going to be unique as to where it is, but it's got to have common foundations so it can be analyzed and something can be done with it. If we can do that, then the social interaction kicks in. And in our example, in our final call, we actually have an example where we can build in, I scan the asset, I enter in a ticket, it's tied to the asset, which is in turn tied to the generic BIM, which is in turn tied to the source BIM, and we have that fusion or that gluing of data from various realms. If we can get this, and IBI is doing a lot of work to get there, and then tie that to the digital economy, then we're at a place where we can springboard into smart city connectivity and who knows what else. But we can't lose sight of the digital economy connectivity. Every asset you have, and you know, before I finish that thought, I'm thinking, if you're sitting on this call thinking, and I love saying this, that's great, Brent, but I still can't print from my Revit. We'll get there. We will get there in the realm of BIM authoring. But every piece you put into a Revit model or a Civil 3D model will be built, will be connected to something. The biggest break in our industry today is where the connections are static, forgotten, data is lost, data is duplicated, nobody knows what's current, and everybody who has an issue with something has no avenue or mechanism to express the issue and make something happen. The biggest break we have today, and it's been a break we've had for a very long time. If we can achieve this, and the asset information, the social information, and the BIM model is tied, connected, and infused to the people making decisions, analyzing the assets, the risks, the changes, the fit-outs, what a world we would be in. The financial decisions, it would all be tied together. So a little sidestep here for a second. I probably should have put this before. Interactive VR, that's another thing of the future. So as we're doing all this, connecting all of this data together, we want to be immersed with the data. So Microsoft HoloLens, if you've heard of it, I think there's a lot of potential there. If you haven't heard of it, just Google it. For me, I think that's our fusion between advanced visualization, augmented reality, or virtual reality, infused with holographic interface with our design and our information. It will also be tied with the Internet of Things, so all of our objects connected in the digital economy. So if we achieve that interaction of BIM authorship through to social interaction, HoloLens can be a mechanism by which we attach. So that's why I put it after all of this. I look at it and I say, yeah, it's slick. It's still kind of clunky. You know, again, thinking sci-fi, imagine when the HoloLens are nothing more than contact lens you might put on your eye and you have full interaction of the data. So we're there to an extent. There's a lot of work to be done from the HoloLens perspective in order to tie it to the models we build, the generic, the asset management, and where all the data is coming from. But the potential there, coupled with advancements in our hardware and our software systems, is quite impressive. And Trimble, there's a Trimble with SketchUp that they've just released that I think is quite interesting just to see the potential. So as Autodesk and Bentley and a lot of our major vendors start to build ties with the HoloLens technology, we'll be in a very, very happy place in the coming, I want to say months. I was going to say years, but I think this one will be far quicker. So predicting the future, I don't know what the future holds, but how better to predict the future than to look back to the past? March 2015, I threw this slide up. It was my first month in IBI, so we've got to standardize to optimize. We're still doing a lot of work with standardizing what we do. Standardizing does not by any means mean make what we do a commodity. It just means bring consistency so we're not reinventing the wheel, so that we can look to optimize, which would be aspects of asset management, advanced BIM applications, fusion into this digital economy. If I took models from 15 different offices across IBI and tried to infuse them into an asset management system in a digital smart infrastructure, they'd have to have some common foundation, or else I don't even know what would come out of that. But that was what I talked about the first day I was there, and this is where I think we are. So looking at this, you know, and I like the paper to CAD. So, you know, yeah, there still is a bit of a paper world out there, but that movement from paper to CAD to BIM, you know, that was a very long time frame. And I like to say that optimization through BIM, we're there, but I do that with air quotes because I know we're not. I know we're still struggling in, you know, optimizing on BIM authorship, but in the industry at large, you know, BIM is there. We've got our tools, we have workflows and procedures, we're continuing to better optimize how we do BIM in light of where we really are today, and that's the realm of connectivity. It's all about connecting information, data gluing, and infusing us to the digital economy and the end users. Getting out there, the users interacting with the assets, and the information being at all of our disposal, either for user use, for management, so operational management, expansion, planning for capacity expansion, and then actually designing and constructing the infrastructure within which we all live. Kind of where we are today, don't know what's next, right? But that's the question, that's the excitement of, I think, where we are going forward. And with that, I hope you guys, everybody found this insightful. The last one is, I think, the first Tuesday of December, and it will be BIM as a service and a deliverable. And what we're going to talk about is, you know, BIM as a deliverable. What do we turn over to our clients? What can we turn over to our clients? And then the concept of what are the things we can offer as value-add services to make sure there is a delineation between when we BIM to do our work and when we BIM to increase scope, schedule, and budget, and what are some of those things? One of those things being the asset management as a service, which we'll portray. And with that, I'll have a look for any questions. I didn't remind anybody at the beginning. I kind of jumped right into the presentation. If you're an AIA member, please type in your AIA number right now into the question pane. What we do then is pass that off to the IBIU administrators, and they will have your AIA record updated. If you're an AIBC member in British Columbia, please also enter or make note of that here so we can correlate with the AIBC for your Con Ed points. And everybody else, just the fact that you're present here, I will pass the attendance to IBIU, and they will develop a certificate, and you can then self-report for your continuing education. And with that, as I'm out of breath, if there are any questions, I'll just give a couple more minutes on the webinar here before I close it. So type in your AIA numbers, and if there are any questions. Hopefully you all didn't think this was way out there, but you know, from the whole progression of this this series, you know, we started with what BIM does, and we've kind of now finished with where it could go. And I think that's an exciting path that we've gotten to. Okay. So I'm going to close it. If you haven't sent your number, just email it to ibiu@ibigroup.com, and if you send it to me, I'll just forward it off to them anyway. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day, and I hope you call into the last session.